Send $4,200 for your brother's cabin deposit, my dad said like it was already settled. I replied, ask the son you keep rewarding. Mom jumped in, then don't show your face here again. I locked my screen and kept driving. By breakfast, the trip they'd been bragging about was in serious trouble. All right, guys, one small favor before we begin. If you look down and that subscribe button is still red, do me a solid and tap it. We put a lot of work into every single video, and having you as a subscriber helps us keep doing this thing we love. Trust me, it means more than you think. Okay, now let's get right into today's video. My brother has a cabin trip planned for his birthday. The deposit is $4,200. The guest list is 14 people. The group chat has been active for 3 weeks. I'm not in the group chat. I am apparently in the budget. Well, my name is Ethan and I'm 31 years old. And the thing you need to understand about my family is that I built the financial infrastructure they run on. Not metaphorically, literally. 4 years ago, when my parents kept overdrafting their checking account and my brother's rent check bounced for the second time in 3 months, I opened a joint family account at the same bank I use for my own finances. I set up the login, linked the routing number, and started depositing $500 a month into it so there'd be a cushion for emergencies. I also gave my mother an authorized user card on one of my credit accounts for situations that couldn't wait for a transfer, a medical bill, a car repair, something urgent that needed a card number and couldn't float until the next deposit cleared. That was 4 years ago. Once the emergencies turned into expenses, the expenses turned into requests, and the requests turned into something I didn't have a name for until about 3 days ago when I found it on the back of an envelope in my own handwriting. Tuesday evening, I was driving home from work when my father called. I picked up on the second ring because that's what I do when my father calls. Or at least that's what I used to do. I need you to send $4,200 for the cabin deposit, he said, in the voice he uses when something has already been decided and the phone call is just the paperwork. No lead-in, no how are you, no mention of the fact that I hadn't spoken to anyone in the family for about 2 weeks. Just the number and the expectation delivered the way a billing department delivers an invoice. The cabin deposit for what? I asked, though I already had a good idea. My brother Kevin was turning 28 in 10 days and the family had been making vague references to a birthday trip for the last month, the kind of references that included everyone's name except mine. Kevin's birthday, the cabin in Pine Ridge. The whole family's going. I booked it 3 weeks ago and the deposit's due Friday. 3 weeks ago. He booked it 3 weeks ago and was calling me on Tuesday to tell me the deposit was due Friday, the way you call a contractor 3 days before a deadline and act surprised when they mention they were never hired. Ask the son you keep rewarding, I said. The line was quiet for about 4 seconds, which is a long time on a phone call with my father, because my father doesn't do silence, he does authority. And silence is the sound authority makes when it runs into something it wasn't expecting. What did you just say? I said ask Kevin. It's his birthday, his trip, his cabin. Ethan, this is a family thing. Everyone's contributing. Everyone except the person you forgot to invite. He started to say something else, but I'd already heard enough of the voice. The voice that sounds like management and feels like a withdrawal slip. So I said, I have to go, and hung up. 20 minutes later, while I was pulling into my parking lot, my mother texted. Not a call, a text. 7 words in the gray bubble on my screen. Then don't show your face here again. No greeting, no context, just the threat, delivered in the same efficient format she uses for everything, was the format that treats communication like a transaction and expects you to fill in the emotional blanks yourself. I read it at the red light before my apartment complex, locked the screen, set the phone in the cup holder, and pulled into my parking spot. I sat in the car for about a minute, not processing, thinking. My mother's text was a threat to revoke social access, which is the only leverage she has because financial access runs the other direction, from me to them, and she either doesn't realize that or has decided not to think about it. I went upstairs, dropped my bag, and sat down at the kitchen table with my laptop and my phone. I opened my credit card statement, which I almost never check line by line because AutoPay handles the balance And I trust the system the way you trust the walls in a building you've been living in for years without checking whether someone's been borrowing the bricks. I scrolled through the recent charges the way I scroll through most things on that app, quickly, half attentively, looking for anything that doesn't belong. Most of the charges were mine: groceries from the store on Elm, gas from the station near the highway on-ramp, a streaming subscription I keep meaning to cancel and keep not canceling because $11 a month feels like too small a hill to bother dying on. And then, about 2/3 of the way down, between a charge for takeout and one for a parking meter, a name I didn't recognize: Pine Ridge Mountain Retreats, $4,200, dated 3 weeks ago. In March 2nd, I stopped scrolling and stared at the line item long enough for the screen to dim, and I had to tap it awake to make sure I'd read the amount correctly, which I had. The charge was already on my card. It had been there for 3 weeks, sitting in my statement between parking meters and takeout containers, while I went about my life not knowing that my mother had given my card number to a cabin rental company in the mountains for a weekend that 14 people were planning without me. The $4,200 my father had just asked me to send wasn't a deposit I was being asked to fund. It was a charge that had already been placed, and the phone call was reimbursement theater, the financial equivalent of stealing someone's car and then calling them to ask for gas money. I pulled an envelope from the stack of mail on the corner of the table, the kind of envelope that contains something you don't need to open because you already know it's a credit card offer or a utility notice. And I flipped it over and wrote on the back with a pen I found next to the salt shaker: $4,200, Pine Ridge, March 2nd. I put the pen down and looked at the number, and something shifted in the way I understood the last 7 years of transfers and favors and late-night card numbers read over the phone. And the shift felt less like anger and more like the moment you realize the cabinet you've been reaching into has a false bottom and someone else has been using the space underneath. Wednesday morning, I called Pine Ridge Mountain Retreats from my kitchen table. A woman answered, professional. We're the kind of voice you hear when you call a place that deals with bookings and cancellations all day and has stopped being surprised by either one. I'm calling about a reservation. I believe it's under my name, Ethan Calloway. Let me look that up for you. Typing. A short pause. Yes, I have a booking under Ethan Calloway. Arriving Saturday, departing Monday. The reservation was made on March 2nd by a Patricia Calloway. Primary payment method is a Visa ending in 4471. March 2nd. 3 weeks ago. Patricia, my mother. She used my name, my card number, and what I later found out was my old mailing address, the one I had before I moved 2 years ago, the one she helped me set up forwarding for, the one she apparently still remembers well enough to type into a reservation form for a cabin I wasn't invited to. Can you tell me who the listed guests are? I have 14 guests listed. Would you like me to read the names? No. Am I on the guest list? Another pause, shorter this time, the kind of pause that happens when someone is looking at a screen and the answer is simple but the context clearly isn't. You're listed as the reservation holder and primary payer. You're not on the guest list. I wrote that on the envelope too. Reservation holder, primary payer, not on the guest list. 3 facts that, arranged in that order, tell a story nobody in my family intended for me to read. What's the cancellation policy? Full refund if canceled more than 72 hours before check-in. After that, 50%. The check-in is Saturday at 3 p.m. Thank you. I hung up and sat with the envelope for a while. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, someone was starting a leaf blower 2 buildings over, the sound rising and falling in waves that didn't seem to bother anyone but me. Thursday, I went deeper. I opened the joint family account, the one I'd set up 4 years ago, the one I funded with $500 every month. The recent transactions loaded, and I scrolled through them the way you scroll through a document you wrote years ago and suddenly don't recognize. 3 withdrawals to Pine Ridge Mountain Retreats over the past 3 weeks, separate from the credit card charge. $300 on March 4th, $450 on March 12th, $275 on March 18th. Each one had a vague transaction note. Family expense. My mother's handiwork. She wasn't just using my credit card. She was tapping the joint account at the same time, pulling from 2 of my financial systems simultaneously, Somewhere the way someone runs two hoses from the same spigot and assumes the water supply is infinite. I kept scrolling. Not just the last 3 weeks, the last 12 months. The transfers I'd made to the family over the past year were listed in chronological order, each one tagged with the reason my mother had texted me before I sent it. I used to read those reasons and take them at face value. Now I read them like a second language I was only just learning to translate. April, 8 months ago. $200 for Easter supplies. I sent it in 11 minutes without questioning it. 3 weeks later, I saw a photo on my cousin's Facebook page from a baby shower I wasn't told about. Pink balloons, a cake, about 20 people in my aunt's living room. My mother in the front row, my sister-in-law beside her. The $200 didn't go to Easter supplies. June. $350 for Dad's truck registration. I sent it that evening. The following week, someone mentioned Kevin's housewarming party in passing, the one where he'd moved into his new apartment, and the family threw a dinner I found out about through a photo Kevin's girlfriend posted on Instagram. My father's truck registration costs $85. I know because I renewed it myself the year before. October. $600 for Dad's car repair. Sent it before bed. The next month, scrolling through Tara's Instagram, I found a photo from a family gathering at a restaurant I'd never been to. White tablecloth, candles, 8 people, a banner that said, "Happy Retirement, Aunt Carol." The $600 didn't fix a car. It funded a party I wasn't told about for a retirement I wasn't invited to celebrate. Sauna, I put the phone on the table and stood up and walked to the window and stood there for about 20 seconds with my hands in my pockets. Not thinking exactly, just letting something pass through me that I didn't have a word for yet. It wasn't anger, it was closer to the feeling you get when you open a cabinet you've been reaching into for years and discover it has a false bottom. I sat back down and kept scrolling. The pattern wasn't subtle once you saw it. Every 3 or 4 months, a request from my mother with a specific dollar amount and a specific stated reason, and every 3 or 4 months, a family event I wasn't part of that happened within weeks of the transfer. Not every transfer was a lie. Some of them probably went where she said they went. But enough of them didn't that the word probably had stopped feeling like a safe place to stand. Then I did the math on the $4,200. The cabin charge of my credit card was $4,200. The 3 joint account withdrawals totaled $1,025. The actual booking, when I checked Pine Ridge's website, listed cabins in that size range for $3,100 to $3,600 per weekend. The numbers didn't match. Even at the high end, the credit card charge plus the joint account withdrawals exceeded the booking cost by over $1,600. The overage was going somewhere, either to supplies and extras being charged without my knowledge, or into a gap I couldn't account for. I wrote all of it on the back of the envelope. The cabin price range, the card charge, the joint account pulls, the surplus. Oh, and by Thursday night, the envelope looked like a receipt from a restaurant where I'd been eating for years without seeing the bill. Thursday night, sitting on my couch, the TV on with the sound down, I finally understood what Tuesday's phone call had been. My father didn't call to ask for $4,200. He called to ask me to replace $4,200 that had already been taken from my card without my permission. The call was reimbursement theater. He was asking me to pay myself back and hand the refund to him, which is a kind of financial magic trick that only works on someone who doesn't check his statements. I used to be that person. I'm not anymore. I also checked the old email address that night, the one my mother helped me set up years ago and still has access to because she was there when I chose the password. I logged in for the first time in over a year and found 3 weeks of emails from Pine Ridge Mountain Retreats, booking confirmations, payment receipts, guest logistics, check-in instructions, all addressed to me as the reservation holder, all sitting in an inbox my mother assumed I'd never look at because I'd moved to a new email 2 years ago and told everyone to use the new one. I changed the password. Around 9, I was at the grocery store picking up a few things for the week when a woman from my office, Diane, spotted me in the produce aisle. We talked for a minute about nothing, the way co-workers do when they run into each other outside of fluorescent lighting, and then she said, "Your mom mentioned the cabin trip to my husband at the hardware store last week. Sounds like a great time. When the whole family going?" I held a bag of apples in one hand and looked at her, and considered every possible response the way you consider exits in a room that just got smaller. Not sure yet, I said. Diane nodded and moved on to the avocados, and I stood there for a second understanding that my family had been advertising a trip that included my money and excluded my presence. And the advertising had reached people who assumed the whole family meant the whole family. Friday, I acted. I called the credit card company at lunch. The representative's name was James, and he had the kind of patient, methodical voice that made the process feel less like a confrontation and more like filing a form, which is exactly what it was. I'd like to dispute an unauthorized charge from Pine Ridge Mountain Retreats. $4,200. It dated March 2nd. Let me pull up the account. I see the charge. Can you confirm you didn't authorize this transaction? I didn't. Someone provided my card number without my knowledge. Understood. I'm also seeing two smaller charges from the same merchant. $180 on March 10th and $95 on March 16th. Are those authorized? I hadn't noticed those. Supplies, probably. Groceries or equipment ordered to the cabin address. My mother hadn't just charged the deposit. She'd been outfitting the trip on my card in smaller increments, charges low enough to blend into a statement you're not reading carefully. Those aren't authorized either. I'll open disputes for all three. The total comes to $4,475. You should see a provisional credit within 5 to 7 business days. Would you also like a replacement card with a new number? $4,475. $4,475 charged to my card for a birthday trip I wasn't invited to, booked under my name at an address I don't live at, by a woman who memorized my card number because I gave it to her once for an emergency and she saved it for everything that came after. Yes, new number. I'll process that tonight. Your current card will be deactivated within 24 hours. The current card that my mother has memorized or saved in a file somewhere, the number she's typed into forms and given to vendors and used for 4 years of emergencies that I'm only now learning weren't all emergencies. That number would be dead by Saturday morning. After the credit card call, I logged into the joint family account, the one I built, the one I funded. I changed the access permissions. I removed the automatic monthly deposit and set the account so that withdrawals over $50 required my approval. I didn't close it. Closing it would be dramatic. Adjusting the settings was administrative. The difference matters. I wrote the confirmation numbers on the back of the envelope, which by now had more ink on it than the letter it originally contained. 3 actions completed on a Friday afternoon. Credit card disputed, new card issued, joint account reconfigured. Past, present, future. Each one defensible, each one a boundary, each one the removal of a floor tile the family didn't know they were standing on. Friday night I made dinner. Nothing special, chicken and rice and a vegetable. I steamed in a pot I bought when I first moved into this apartment 4 years ago. The same year I opened the joint account. In the same year I started depositing $500 a month into a fund that I thought was building a safety net for my family and turned out to be building a party budget I wasn't included in. I ate at the kitchen table next to the envelope, which by now had so many numbers on the back that it looked less like mail and more like a napkin from a restaurant where someone had been working out a very specific bill. My phone was screened down on the surface, and the apartment was quiet in the way apartments are quiet on Friday nights when you've spent the afternoon dismantling the financial infrastructure of your family's weekend plans, and you're now sitting with the results of that dismantling and a plate of chicken that's slightly overcooked because you were on hold with the credit card company when the timer went off. Outside, in the parking lot, lights clicked on at their automatic timer. Somewhere between here and Pine Ridge Mountain Retreats, 14 people were packing bags, making playlists, buying groceries for a cabin that was, as of about 4 hours ago, standing on nothing but a booking confirmation addressed to a man who wasn't coming and a credit card number that no longer worked. I washed the dishes and dried them and put them away, which is something I do when I need my hands to be busy so the rest of me can be still. I turned off the kitchen light and stood in the dark for a moment, listening to the refrigerator hum and the parking lot settle and the absence of any sound from the phone on the counter. Then I went to bed. Saturday morning, the phone rang at 6:22 a.m. Dad. I let it ring twice, then picked up. Not because I was avoiding him, and because I was making coffee and the machine was loud, and I needed to move to the other side of the kitchen to hear. Ethan, the voice was different. Tuesday's voice had been authority. Saturday's voice was a search party. There's a problem with the cabin booking. The company called Kevin this morning and said the reservation is in jeopardy because of a payment issue. Something about the card being declined or reversed. It wasn't declined. It was disputed. Silence. I reported the charges as unauthorized because they were. Ethan, your mother used that card for the deposit. She's been handling the booking. She used my card, my name, and my old address without telling me. She's been charging the card for 3 weeks and pulling from the joint account at the same time. Oh, the total is over $5,000 for a trip I wasn't invited to. There must have been a miscommunication about the invitation. I'm sure your mother meant to. Dad, there's a group chat with 14 people in it. I'm not in it. My name is in the budget section next to $4,200. I've seen it. He didn't ask how I'd seen it, which meant either someone told him I'd seen it or he already knew what the budget message said. Let's not blow this out of proportion, he said, and I recognized the gear shift, the pivot from panic to management, the same mechanism he used on Tuesday, except now the authority had no money behind it, and the management had no leverage, and the voice that used to sound like a settled decision sounded like a man reading a script that wasn't working. I'm not blowing anything out of proportion. I filed a dispute because someone used my credit card without authorization. That's not a family issue. That's a financial one. The call ended without resolution, which is a word that means something different when the person who usually resolves things has stopped volunteering. At 7:40, my mother texted, not a call. She doesn't call when she's managing. She texts, after everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us. I read it and thought about the word everything. I opened my transfer history and scrolled through the last 4 years. $500 a month into the joint account for 48 months. Separate transfers totaling another $14,000 or so for things labeled as emergencies, repairs, and medical costs. The authorized user card charges I just discovered, the cabin deposit, the trip supplies. Watch the grocery delivery to an address I don't recognize. All of it, everything, flowing in one direction. From my account to theirs, from my name on a credit card to my name on a reservation I wasn't welcome at. I didn't reply to the text. Kevin called at 8:15. I let it ring. He called again at 8:25. I picked up. Ethan, hey, so I just got off the phone with the cabin company, and they're saying there's a payment issue and the reservation might get canceled if it's not sorted by noon. His voice had the quality of someone holding a problem they'd never held before, slightly out of breath, slightly too fast, like a man carrying furniture through a door frame that's 3 inches too narrow. What did they say exactly? That the card on file was disputed and they need a new payment method by noon or the booking is released. Whose name is the booking under? I think it's under yours. That's what the lady said. Do you know when it was booked? No. Do you know how much the total is? Not exactly. Mom handled all of that. Do you know how it was being paid for? Ethan, can you just call them and sort it out? Put the card back on or whatever? I'll pay you back. How much will you pay me back? Whatever it costs. You just said you don't know how much it costs. He was quiet for a few seconds. I could hear someone in the background, probably his girlfriend, asking what was happening. Look, man, and I know things are weird right now, but this is my birthday, and I've got 14 people expecting to be at this cabin tonight, and if the booking gets canceled, I don't know what to do, because I've never dealt with this kind of thing before. I know you haven't. So can you help? No. The word sat on the line for about 3 seconds. It was probably the first time Kevin had heard it from me on a topic that involved money, and I could feel him trying to figure out whether it was a negotiating position or a wall. It was a wall. Why not? Because the charges were unauthorized, the booking is under my name without my permission, the joint account was tapped without my knowledge, and the $4,200 Dad asked me to send on Tuesday was to reimburse money that was already taken from my card 3 weeks ago. I'm not fixing this, Kevin. Honey, I didn't break it. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then, you should come to the cabin. There's still room. An invitation, offered on Saturday morning, 3 weeks after the planning started, hours before check-in, minutes after the money disappeared. A seat at the table extended the moment the table needed funding. "I'm good," I said, and hung up. I poured a second cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table and set the phone on the counter and watched the morning come through the window. The light moved across the floor in the slow way it does when nothing is scheduled and nobody needs you to be anywhere. My phone buzzed 3 more times between 9 and 11. I didn't look at who. I didn't need to. The pattern of the buzzing told me everything. Short bursts, multiple contacts, the rhythm of a family discovering that the infrastructure they stood on belonged to someone who wasn't standing there anymore. At 12:08 p.m., my phone buzzed with a notification from Pine Ridge Mountain Retreats, an automated email. Booking number 4471-EC has been canceled due to non-receipt of payment by the required deadline. If you believe this is an error, please contact our reservations team. I read it, closed it, drank my coffee. The rest of Saturday was quiet in a way I hadn't experienced in a long time. The specific quiet that arrives when a system shuts down and the people who depended on it are still standing in the space where it used to be, looking around for the switch. My phone buzzed a few more times in the afternoon, 3 or 4 calls that I could hear from the living room like a small animal tapping on the counter. Namran and I left it where it was because there was nothing on that phone that required me to stand up and nothing in those calls that I hadn't already answered by filing 3 disputes and changing 2 passwords on a Friday afternoon. By 4 o'clock, the calls slowed. By 6, they stopped entirely, and the silence that replaced them was different from the silence of a normal Saturday evening. It was the silence of 14 people who had been expecting a weekend in the mountains and were now sitting in their own apartments or their own cars or their own kitchens trying to understand what happened to the trip they'd been planning for 3 weeks. I wondered how many of them knew my name. I wondered how many of them had seen the budget message in the group chat. I wondered how many of them were now doing the math that I'd done on Thursday and arriving at the same number on the back of the same kind of envelope. I cleaned the apartment, which didn't need cleaning, but my hands needed a task, so I gave them one. I did laundry and folded it carefully and put everything in the right drawer. I made dinner, something simple, and ate it standing at the counter the way I'd been eating most of my meals that week. Not because I didn't have a table, but because the table had become a workspace, and the workspace had become the most important surface in my apartment, and I didn't want to eat on top of the envelope. The following Thursday, 8 days after the cabin was supposed to happen, I logged into the old email address, the one my mother used to book the reservation, the one I changed the password on. And the inbox had new messages, 3 of them, not from Pine Ridge, from my mother. She'd been emailing the old address the way someone knocks on a door they're not sure is still connected to the house. I read the subject lines without opening them. "Please call me. Ethan, I want to explain. This isn't who we are." I read that last one twice. This isn't who we are. I thought about the booking under my name, the card charges, the joint account withdrawals, the $600 car repair that wasn't a car repair, the budget line in the group chat, the 3 weeks of planning that didn't include me, the 14 people who were told I was invited, the co-worker who asked me about the trip in the produce aisle, the $4,475 in unauthorized charges, the mother who texted, "After everything we've done for you," to the son who'd done everything for them. I closed the inbox, changed the password to something longer, something she couldn't guess, something that had nothing to do with any birthday or anniversary or street name she'd recognize. I logged out. The email stayed unread.